Mushroom spores have been dated to remain dormant for millions of years and are still capable of becoming activated when conditions are suitable for their growth. The toughest organic material on the planet is the outer shell of the spore, and it is believed that this aids them in escaping the Earth's atmosphere and entering into outer space. Once in space, they may stay in hibernation until reaching further destinations, possibly light years away. Upon finding a habitable environment, they will begin the evolutionary process by producing fungi.
That's one of the thoughts about mushrooms is that mushrooms are actually from another planet and that they're a life form from another planet, and the only way that this life form can communicate with you is if you eat it. That's one of the thoughts, because we know that Earth
I'm sure
was
someone
seeded
came up with
life.
that thought after
they dropped that mushroom.
Yeah, after they ate the mushroom.
Well, it's also scientifically based, because what mushrooms are is psilocybin is 4-phosphoryloxy N-N-dimethyltryptamine, and it's apparently the only compound in we know about in nature that has phosphorus in the 4 position. There's no other related compounds like it. And the idea is that spores come from asteroids, because we know that like amino acids and all sorts of like life supposedly was seeded from asteroid impacts on Earth. And the thought is that spores also came from another planet, and they are literally an alien life form that has landed here, created mushrooms. People eat these mushrooms and come into contact with these aliens.
Can you imagine just minutes ago we were talking about different ways to jerk off?
Yeah. I like that.
Well, you know, when
now
you're
giving,
smart.
giving me the chemistry.
If you've eaten
chemical
mushrooms
makeup
before,
of mushroom.
one of the things that happens when you eat a lot of mushrooms is when the big, heavy mushroom experiences is like you're getting a lesson from something far more intelligent than you. I mean, literally, like you feel this connection to the world. You feel this, you know, this real sense that everything is intertwined and interconnected. All your actions and all your energy and your thoughts, that it all like manifests itself in your daily life, and it's all this weird like an intelligence is communicating with you. That's what it feels like when you're on mushrooms.
That's fucked
Joe,
up.
if you keep talking like this, you're going to lose your job at UFC. This is
Not at all, man. Not at all.
My
That's
job,
amazing.
I am the bridge between the meatheads and the potheads. That's what I'm here for.
I love that, man. That's a great theory.
It's an interesting theory. You know,
Fuck yeah.
there's a guy named Terence McKenna that believes that human beings evolved from monkeys because they ate mushrooms, and it's based on climate. It's like a scientific theory based on, first of all, the doubling of the human brain size is like a giant mystery, because the human brain size doubled in a period of 2 million years. It's like the biggest mystery in the entire fossil record, and some people believe it's related to the throwing arm, that we figured out how to throw rocks at shit and kill things.
Yeah.
And that's what started this brains. And then also there's another theory that we ate a lot of protein, we were eating more protein, but that doesn't make sense, because you know, tigers still have little fucking brains.
Yeah,
That's all
yeah.
they eat is protein. So his theory is that the primates, when the rainforest receded into grasslands, these primates, because when the environment changed, these primates had to change their diet. They started experimenting with other things. And one of the things they do is they flip over logs and things looking for beetles and grubs and worms to eat. Well, they flip over cow patties too. Like the baboons are observed doing that in Africa all the time, because like grubs and shit grow underneath them. But there's also these psilocybin mushrooms that grow in cow shit, and that they eat these mushrooms and then they have these insane experiences, and these mushrooms make these monkeys start being self-aware, and they start thinking about more things, and then they evolve. Also, the mushrooms, when you take them in low doses, they increase visual acuity, they make you see better, and they make you hornier. So you would have more efficient hunters, because they could see better, hornier, so they'd fuck more, and make also more monkeys that were also aware of the mushrooms, and this would like snowball, and the mushroom-eating monkeys would be more intelligent than the rest of them, and they would evolve quicker. And this is his theory, that over a period of 2 million years, that's how human beings literally came out of lower hominids.
You know, you could get high just listening to Joe.
I feel like
I'm listening to Joe.
contact buzz right now.
I swear I was getting high just listening to
fucking
him.
smoke.
If you ate mushrooms, it would all make sense.
No shit.
I think when monkeys
I bet it would.
I think when they eat mushrooms, they just see yellow or bananas.
Banana is so yellow.
Well, you know, ancient cultures, that's one of the biggest things in ancient cultures is cattle worship. Cattle worship is, there's an ancient culture called Choctaw Hyuk. It's like one of the oldest known
Speaking
civilizations.
Klingon.
Yeah. It's like 7,000, 8,000 years ago, and they worship cows. fucking cattle
because
everywhere.
because
the cow shit, they would find they didn't have microscopes. They didn't know that spores are
thought they were just
microscopic.
shitting out this magic stuff.
Yeah. That's why there's a reason why in India everyone's fucking dying of starvation. They won't eat cows. It's because of mushrooms. Guaranteed. The root of it is the reason why cows are holy, or mushrooms grow in cow shit, and they eat these mushrooms and they see God. So they think that mushrooms are coming from these cows. So these cows are like vehicles for God.
That's
for sure.
That's way better than going to church on Sunday.
Why the fuck else? Why the fuck else would anyone worship a stupid animal, a big dumb animal that creates giant shits? Why would you think that that's God? Why would you think that that's?
And the answer is right there in front of you.
Exactly. It's a direct connection. They have psilocybin mushrooms growing on them. You eat that, you have insane experiences.
It makes
Joe,
sense.
you had one of those mushrooms?
No, never. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm just making shit up. Of course I have.
Yeah, you have.
Of course.
Oh, jeez.
Joe's tried a lot of stuff.
Who the fuck hasn't? You haven't tried mushrooms?
Potentially propelling their brain size to nearly double in a short period of time and creating the emergence of anatomically modern humans, we will briefly discuss a commodity that is likely one of, if not the most ancient, esoteric, and prized commodities of spiritual elite of all time. These are ancient artwork from Tassili, Africa, dating to about 8,000 to 6,000 years ago. And this shows a shaman depicted covered in sacred mushrooms. This is some of the earliest cave art known to man. Here is some of the earliest cave art in Europe. This is in Selva Pascuala, Europe. Now this is from about 6,000 years ago as well. And this shows a cow with mushrooms because the sacred mushrooms often grow in cow pies. These are the Mayan mounds discovered in regions of Mexico during conquest. And in these mounds, they found some of these mushroom stones. Now, to give you a brief summary of the timeline of how sacred mushrooms became a commodity in the United States, it's good to start when it was first discovered in Mexico. Now, Bernardo de Sahagan, right here, is one of the first people to document sacred mushroom use in Mexico among the Nahuatl, which is what we can call today the Aztec. And he described that they would take the mushrooms in rituals, including the inauguration of Moctezuma. Now, a 400-year time span went by without any literature written on the sacred mushroom in Mexico, and no field research was done. And it actually became to the point where in the beginning of the 1900s, it was written that the sacred mushroom didn't even exist. It was believed to be a lure. And it wasn't until Robert Wheatlaner in Mexico discovered the sacred mushroom use among the witch doctors in Mexico, and particularly the Oaxaca region. He transferred these specimens to a Dr. Blas Rico of Mexico, and upon identification of the mushroom as being the flesh of the gods, is what the Aztec had originally called them, according to Sahagan, he forwarded these specimens to Dr. Richard Evans Schultz of Harvard University. Dr. Schultz was not able to identify the species, so he went back to Mexico, found them again, and transferred them to Dr. Singer, who identified these species as psilocybin mushrooms. And then it wasn't until R. Gordon Wasson of Columbia University went down to the Oaxaca region and visited shamanist Maria Sabina and published in Life magazine in 1957 his experience using these sacred mushrooms with the shaman in Mexico. And it was Dr. Hofmann who synthesized the chemicals in these sacred mushrooms to be psilocybin and psilocin in 1957. And here's an image from Life magazine of R. Gordon Wasson first rediscovering the sacred mushroom use by the religious Catholics in Mexico, calling it the flesh of the gods in their Catholic ceremony. And to summarize briefly what I'm going to explain is how the Amanita muscaria mushroom and the psilocybin mushroom are possibly the combination of the blood and body of Christ. These are going to be mirrored images where Jesus is going to be represented by the serpent offering the fruit, Jesus offering his body, and there's the two trees in the garden, the blood and the body.
New work done by Professor John Rush reveals that mushrooms have been encrypted into holy Judeo-Christian images for centuries. It is also important to recognize that artists who worked on these basilisks were required to have credentials of those only initiated into adept teachings of the religion and therefore understood the means by which to conceal their messages into the artwork. By cataloging and reviewing artwork found within cathedrals from the antiquity to modern times, Rush concludes in his book, The Mushroom in Christian Art, that Christ has actually been depicted as referring to mushrooms in Christian artwork for hundreds of years, more blatantly originally, and then slowly encrypted into hidden images as persecution forced these religions into underground and secret guilds and churches. Rush also explains that in the earliest forms of Christian art, Christ was not depicted as a human being at all. Quote, "It wasn't until Jesus was declared fully God and fully human by decree that we start to see actual images of Jesus Christ in the artwork." Unquote. Rush, 2011. Much of this information was brought to us by Oxford student and Dead Sea Scroll scholar, John Allegro, and he deciphered the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was appointed to by the Jordanian governments to decipher these scrolls, and what he found out was that they were actually codex, shamanic text that encrypted mushrooms was actually the body of Jesus Christ. And this was also brought to us by Gordon R. Wasson of Columbia University, and he deciphered the Rig Vedas and declared that their mushroom of immortality was this Amanita muscaria mushroom. And then, so this final piece of the puzzle came in 1957 when Life magazine revealed that in Mexico they were using a mushroom, and they were calling that mushroom the flesh of the gods, and that's the psilocybin mushroom, the second kind of mushroom. During a personal interview regarding the mushroom experience with author and cultural anthropologist from the University of Arizona, Laura Rezao, she recalled the time her Mazatec mushroom ritual took place just outside Tahuatala de Jimenez, Oaxaca, Mexico, with a shaman native to that area. Rezua explained that her mushroom experience was very significant and life-changing. She described the ability, while under the mushroom state, to transmute anger into compassion and have an expanded and wider perspective on self and others. All of existence seemed to come alive, and this offered her a renewed compassion for life and an access to higher wisdom. The Mazatec belief systems that incorporate Catholicism and sacred mushrooms call the mushrooms sacred children, and believe that the mushrooms sprang from the blood of Christ after his resurrection. The mushroom also provides shaman with methods for healing illnesses and gaining insight. When they take the mushrooms, their spirits fly, and they can communicate with the mushroom deities. As one author writes of the mushroom-induced experience, "This experience is one of extremely great value, so much so that I feel it is necessary to the evolutionary process of each and every individual, and inevitably to all of mankind." And it's quick to note that mushrooms are genetically different than humans and animals and plants. They're their own kingdom, and they're more similar to humans than they are to plants. They breathe oxygen, so that's just to name a few things. Mushrooms breathe oxygen and are genetically, biochemically, and structurally more similar to humans and animals than to plants. Anthropologist and botanist Terence McKenna suggested that the mushroom was a possible locality for an alien life form on Earth that originated from another planet or galaxy. This idea is partially due to the fungi's physical features of working in the essential Trinity fashion, in the three necessary stages, first from the spore, then to the mycelium, and finally into the psychedelic, conscious expanding, information providing mushroom fruit body. Mycologist and author Paul Statmans also concludes that evidence supports the notion that the kingdom of fungi are actually sentient species perhaps even more evolved than Homo sapiens.
They grow in three distinct stages, which might be where we get this Trinity cycle in Christianity. They start off in the spores, which are omnipresent throughout the globe, including in the air that we breathe.
Mushroom spores are scientifically considered to be omnipresent around the globe, with billions percolating freely even in the uppermost areas of the Earth's atmosphere. Spores are so tiny and travel so freely through the air that they are found across ocean airspace and remain active or dormant in all unregulated airspace on the planet, including the interior of homes and vehicles.
And then we move into this network of mycelium, which is hooked up to all the root systems of the majority of plants on this planet.
In contrast to the microscopic spore, the largest organism currently known on the planet is none other than a network of mushroom mycelium produced by spores. Weighing in at more than enormous blue whales and even covering more turf than aspen groves, the network of white mycelium that thrives in eastern Oregon, United States, encompasses over 2,000 acres as it holds the title for the largest organism on Earth. Miraculously, these organisms take on a completely passive philosophy by remaining non-invasive to the living matter that surrounds them. The mushroom mycelium produced by the spores and by which the mushroom fruit body grows is comprised of hypha or hyphia, which are minute threads or filaments as vulnerable as spider's webs. Just as a spore is omnipresent throughout the air, so the mycelium too is present wherever chlorophyll-using plants are found. This is because mycelium gives life to all chlorophyll-using plants by living in symbiosis with the root systems, providing vital nutrition to the plant matter. Without this network of mycelium, no photosynthesizing plant would exist. It is understandable that the ancient people would have been amazed at its growth without seed, and its ability to produce mushroom fruit bodies rapidly after morning dew.
And then finally, the final stage of the Trinity, the fruit body, the flesh itself. And again, this would be symbolism of the Holy Communion in Catholicism, where they offer the golden cap of the mushroom. And then the drink here, which will be the drink from the red mushroom, which we might get into in a minute. It's quick to note the basic stages of the growth cycle. It starts off in this egg state, similar to a serpent egg or an Easter egg. And as it grows,
the Nature program describes it like this: a very young and undeveloped mushroom that is still covered with its veil is called an egg. The young mushroom has the shape of a chicken egg, completely covered by a thin membrane called the universal veil. The veil then bursts and reveals the junction of the stem and cap, male and female. Searching for the mushroom while they are still in the egg state is what the Easter egg hunt rituals are clearly centered upon. Under the main visual mushroom structure remains the vulva, which essentially holds the mushroom in what appears to be a sort of grail. Furthermore, once the veil is lifted from what is considered the rib of the mushroom and the stem and cap are revealed, a ring of tissue is left by the female cap around the finger-like mushroom male stem. The revelation of the marriage ritual is blatant with the new understanding regarding the lifting of the veil to reveal the unification of the two sexes with the physical ring remaining.
so once the veil lifts again and the ring is left, the marriage ceremony, these are gills underneath the cap. And this is where we get the fish representation of Jesus Christ. This is what's called a veil. Inner veil lifts and a ring is left, which is where we get our marriage ceremonies. Here we have Moses holding up the serpent on a staff as a symbol of healing, and then many religious people will tell you that Jesus was also crucified on a pole or a staff. These are similar images. So when we see the serpent on the staff, it's actually an image of Jesus being crucified there. It just goes back to the mushroom. And here we have the mushrooms in their egg state, and a mushroom that looks like a serpent. This is where another serpent symbolism comes from. Here are actual serpent eggs. And then once it starts growing and the cap starts to pierce out, we get it looking like Easter eggs here, or Easter egg hunts. As it grows up, it can form a round circular table. This is where we get the Knights of the Round Table that protect the Holy Grail.
made out of gold.
That's the cup of a carpenter. There's only one way to find out.
This is also can be golden or orange or red, and this is where we get our golden plates of Joseph Smith. And then it goes into the Grail. It can actually fill with morning dew. You can actually drink directly from the Holy Grail of blood of Christ. We know that this is a psychedelic mushroom because in Siberia, here's 2,000-year-old cave art depicting sacred mushrooms there. They're currently still using the Amanita muscaria mushroom in shamanism there. And what they're known to do is feed them to these reindeer and possibly drink the reindeer urine because it converts the ibotonic acid of the mushroom into the muscimol psychedelic chemical for the shaman. So here we have a Santa Claus looking like the Siberian shaman feeding reindeer the apple, and of course the apple is a representation of the mushroom.
So our story of Christmas, or Christmas, arises from Siberian shaman going into the woods seeking out the red and white colored psychoactive Amanita muscaria mushroom that grows in a symbiotic relationship with the roots of the pine tree. Hence the theme of green, red, and white as Christmas colors originates from the green pine tree with red and white spotted mushrooms underneath. Dressed up as the Amanita muscaria sacrament in a red and white outfit, not much unlike many outfits worn by popes, high priests, and of course Santa Claus, the shaman would gather the mushrooms for the townspeople. First, the shaman would pluck some of the mushrooms from the ground and place them in the trees to begin drying, like an ornament hung in a tree. After enough mushrooms had been gathered for the community, the shaman would bag them up and bring the partially dried gifts back to the yurts for delivery. In Siberia, where the Amanita mushroom is abundant and has a cultic history, the snow would sometimes block the doorways of the yurt homes, so the gift-bearing shaman would be forced to climb down the chimneys. Before eating, the Amanita muscaria must be fully dried or it can be toxic. So once the mushrooms were delivered, the families then hung them in stockings above the fireplace to dry them out completely overnight, making sure they were edible for consumption. The red and white fly agaric, also known as the Amanita muscaria, has a bright and beautiful look. Its psychedelic effects have made it a legend. From the bush that Moses spoke with, which was on fire but did not burn up, to the Holy Grail of immortality and the sacred Soma of the Vedas, muscaria mushrooms may be central to Christmas and the actual blood of Christ. After the stockings were hung, the family would scurry off to bed only to awaken to dried Amanita muscaria mushrooms ready to be eaten. The laymen and children, which were allowed to partake in the sacred substance, either saw beautifully colorful heavenly bright lights and had a wonderful time communing with the divine realms because they were good and happy people, or if they were naughty, a bad trip caused them to enter a place of terror called hell. 1 Corinthians 11 reads, "So then, whoever eats the bread and drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. Everyone ought to examine themselves before they eat of the bread and drink from the cup. For those who eat and drink without discerning the body of Christ eat and drink judgment on themselves. That is why many among you are weak and sick, and a number of you have fallen asleep. But if we were more discerning with regard to ourselves, we would not come under such judgment. Nevertheless, when we are judged in this way by the Lord, we are being disciplined so that we will not be finally condemned with the world." Unquote. The final and main ritual to be understood about the mushroom is Eucharist, or communion, as described by the Catholic Church. It is important to understand that the doctrine of transubstantiation was established under Emperor Pope Innocent III in the early 1100s, whereby the priests claimed to transmute an ordinary wafer or cracker into the literal body of Christ. This is because the Church recognizes the importance that the Bible puts on the actual eating of Christ's body. John 6 reads, quote, "Then Jesus said unto them, I tell you the truth, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up in the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He that eats my flesh and drinks my blood dwells in me, and I in him." Unquote. It is also important to note here that the Amanita muscaria is the blood red mushroom, which contains the psychoactive ingredient known as muscimol, whereas the gold-capped and other psychoactive mushrooms contain a different active ingredient known as psilocybin. Combining these distinct fungi may be the answer to the blood and body parables.
So feeding out the reindeer, and this is where you get the sauna flying with this Rudolph in the red nose. And it's common to see reindeer encrypted into the images of the Garden of Eden, and this is just one of many examples. Here's the Dome of the Rock in Israel, and this is a symbol of the unopened psilocybin mushroom. And this is where much of the symbolism goes back to. In ancient Egypt, this is Isis holding out her wings with her horns and disc. That goes to the wings of this scarab beetle, which is actually a dung beetle that feeds off of cow dung. So that's why they have the cow horns, because it feeds off of cow dung. And then the golden cap psilocybin mushroom grows specifically on cow dung. And so this is why you have the holy cow producing the holy cow manure, which then you get the flesh of the gods from, so the dung beetle holds up the golden cap.
Throughout ancient Egypt, the dung beetle, an insect of the order of Coleoptera, family of Scarabaeoidea, genus of Caper, and the species of Caper aegyptorum, had become one of the most common symbols represented in Egyptian iconography. Ancient Egyptians would have collectively known this dung beetle as the sacred scarab. To illustrate how popular the symbol of the beetle became in ancient Egypt, it ought to be understood that the beetle was so sanctified by the people of ancient Egypt that they endowed it as a religious figure. Keper, also known as Kepri, is not only the modern genus name of the beetle, but also the name given to the actual Egyptian deity, whom was identified symbolically by a human body with a dung beetle for his head. Scarab beetles were apparently so important to the ancient Egyptian culture that their images are depicted all throughout royal tomb walls, in artwork, and in hieroglyphs. Many times they are depicted holding an orange or golden disc. Images of the sacred scarabs are not only included on paintings and engravings, but also range from simple to elaborate items, and were worn on all types of jewelry such as rings, necklaces, pectorals, and bracelets. Another popular object in Egypt that maintained this image is known as the heart scarab. Heart scarabs are small, varying in size, with some approximately 3 inches long, 2 inches wide, and about a ½ inch or larger in thickness. These manufactured figurines were commercially produced in ancient Egypt and closely resemble a scarab beetle with a flat base. The base contained varying engraved inscriptions. The amulets were traditionally mummified near the hearts of all deceased whom were given a proper burial, commoner and royalty alike. It was said that these amulets would assist in achieving an eternal afterlife. To exemplify the importance of this predominating insect symbol in the ancient world of Egypt, the scarab-shaped amulet with inscriptions at the base also became the primary method for clay sealing documents and goods, similar to more modern wax sealing. And by circa 2000 BCE, all government officials, high and low, were appointed scarab amulets with their names and titles engraved upon the base. Some heart scarab amulets, which were encrypted with the name of deceased rulers, are said to have been produced in bulk and were historically offered at funerary temples as souvenirs by the royal families. A variety of scarab amulets, no single one identical, were manufactured from practically any kind of stone available, and even the use of precious metals are seen in scarab objects. It has been said that the popularity of the scarab motif was equaled only to that of the famous Eye of Horus. From about 2200 BCE to late in Egyptian history, scarabs remained one of the most common objects manufactured in all of Egypt. The number of scarab items found is in the hundreds of thousands, with scarab symbolism and items located within every single excavation site across Egypt, many of which include a depiction of an orange or golden disc in the beetle's grasp or between its wings. The physical dung beetle, or scarab, is typically about 8 to 11 millimeters long, black, and has encased wings on its back, which it can expand and use for short-term, low-elevation flights at heights of about a half meter above the ground. Today we see the majority of extant beetles within the order of Coleoptera scarabida typically display one of two behavioral traits. One, rollers, which is a task of the male beetles who use their powerful spade-like forearms to collect and mold dung into a nearly perfect sphere, or ball, about 4 to 5 times its size, comparable to the size of an apple, which is then easily rolled to their tunnel or buried in sand. 2. Tunnelers. Believed to be the focus of female beetles, these beetles burrow tunnels often directly beneath cow dung, where they will store dung for food, nest building, and egg laying. The tunnelers start by burrowing 4 to 8 inches deep into the ground, where they will then hollow out a chamber. The chambers are approximately 4 inches square, in which the beetle brings the dung and mushroom material into. Next, in the small hollowed 4-inch chamber, the female uses the material from the dung and mushrooms to form a nesting ball. Furthermore, once the scarab eggs hatch, the newborn pupas burrow deeper into the earth and create a second underground chamber, while further developing until emerging weeks later. Interestingly, some authors have noted that there seems to be striking resemblances with the human burial sites in Egypt, utilizing these tunnel chambering techniques, with mummies resembling the scarab in its pupa stage. The relationship of the scarab beetle to cow dung is so intertwined that the development of the sacred scarab from egg to adult has only been documented by the use of cow dung. Furthermore, the connection to certain dung beetles and cow's dung can be seen in the controlled studies where lifespans were significantly lower for beetles whom were fed foods without dung. Reproduction was also not replicable within controlled environments where dung as a food source was not made available and instead replaced by other plausibly viable substrates. A particularly notable aspect regarding the sacred scarab behavior, which was previously alluded to, is that the beetle is known to incorporate mushroom fruit bodies, with the focus of mushroom cap and gill sections, into both its brood and feeding sources. To further motivate these behaviors, the wet seasons are not only when the maximum dung beetle activity occurs, but also the same wet seasons are the times in which the mushroom fruit bodies are typically in most abundance as well. This notable tendency for dung beetles to feed on mushrooms and incorporate them into nesting has been recorded in several cases and has been well documented in controlled studies where, quote, abundant species were attracted to a variety of food types, but several species appeared to specialize on either dung and or mushrooms, unquote. These facts serve to illustrate that many dung beetles depend on strict use of both dung and mushrooms as the beetle's sole resources of housing and nutrition. A remarkable feature of the cattle dung, which is utilized by the beetles, is the dung's highly supportive nature toward not just any mycological life, but instead, cattle dung is particularly known for producing a psychoactive, hallucinogenic, psilocybin cubensis species. Mushroom species containing psilocybe are said to occur on all continents throughout the globe, including areas of New Guinea, Africa, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, Argentina, Venezuela, and others. Studies of the psilocybin mushroom in both southern Mexico and Houston have shown P. cubensis to thrive, quote, exclusively in pastures on decomposing cow dung or found on cow dung and rice hull compost in fields that support cattle, unquote. Rice hull can be expected to show mycological growth, as cultivation of mushrooms has been successfully applied to a variety of grain substrates, particularly grains which do not become soft when boiled, primarily cereal straws such as wheat straw, rice bran, millet straw, soybean straw, and brewer's grain. It appears then that the learned ability of cultivating mycology on wheat substrates, which were particularly abundant in ancient Egypt, can ultimately explain the integration of wheat images with the golden disc in place of the scarab motif with the golden disc. The reason that these mushrooms would have been so sacredly cultivated is because the psilocybin mushrooms contain a special kind of neurotropic hallucinogenic chemical called psilocybe. These mushrooms are famous for their golden or orange tops or caps. It has been well documented that these mushrooms are currently and traditionally used extensively by natives throughout regions of Mesoamerica during religious ritual and ceremony. These mushrooms are known to these native groups as little saints or flesh of the gods, and it is French mycologist Roger Heim who is credited for the discovery that psilocybe species is the neurotropic mushroom which has traditionally been used during spiritual practices, showing that these, quote, cow patty mushrooms, unquote, have in fact historically been used for ceremony, and therefore ancient Egyptians would not be an exclusive group to utilize this substance in ritual. To further explain the importance and sincerity of these substances in religious ceremony, it is important to note that, quote, the Mazatec do, moreover, sometimes suggest it is Christ who speaks to them during their hallucination, unquote. Therefore, it is possible that the attributed neurotic effects of psilocybe to induce spiritual or hallucinogenic experiences which are, quote, commonly known as ego death and spiritual rebirth, were apparently a central, though well-hidden element in many Egyptian religious rituals, unquote. Historically, elite classes using encrypted symbolism to maintain hidden messages is not new, and psychoactive substances such as psilocybin mushrooms are traditionally used by the priestly shamanic classes during religious ceremony and or ritualistic settings that are, more often than not, conducted covertly and with great secrecy. As illustrated on an Egyptian passage from the Book of the Dead, a funerary text reserved for the walls of royalty, which reads, quote, and you shall perform these ceremonies secretly. Let no stranger anywhere have knowledge of it. Do not speak about it to any man. Do not repeat it, unquote. The symbolism of the cattle as sacred has also become an extremely common motif within ancient Egyptian artwork. Motifs of the sacred cattle, usually depicted with the disc between its two horns, became a central theme throughout royal religious societies. It is commonly accepted that the bull was historically worshipped in ancient Egypt by groups known with names such as the cults of Menvis, Bucus, Apis, and others. Cattle were so highly ritualized in Egypt that they were culturally portrayed as royalty and even manifestations of deity. The cattle of Egypt, both males and females, typically have larger and more distinct elongated horns when compared to Western breeds. The cattle itself, as well as just the horns, can be found in royal Egyptian motifs in several forms, such as engravings, statues, and paintings, and are often depicted with a disc, typically golden, between its horns. The disc and horn symbol combination therefore appears to be related to the psilocybe-producing dung, which is utilized by the sacred beetle. The bull horns, as the two wheat stalks, seem to have become a simple replacement or interchangeable symbol for the beetle arms or wings, which traditionally flanked the golden disc. To exemplify this point that the horn and disc symbols are interchangeable with the beetle and disc motifs, we often see a scarab or bird figure underneath the horns. The bird then, commonly falcons or vultures, can easily be interchanged with the bird-like flying scarab motif as an encrypted substitute. Egyptian motifs are also depicted with the beetle blatantly holding the disc and horns simultaneously, presumably to enunciate the symbol combinations. To articulate the sacredness of cattle within the ancient Egyptian empire, it ought to be considered that excavations of Egypt show entire temple structures built specifically for housing and diligently caring for sanctified cattle. The cattle were even depicted as the embodiment of Pharaoh. When the time came, these sacred cattle were bestowed funerary services fit for a king. A sacred cattle's funerary rites would include mummification entailing a heart scarab, treasured gifts, and burial within a sarcophagi, which was specifically made large enough to fit an entire mummified bull. One excavated necropolis of sacred bulls, known as the Serapeum of Saqqara, is located near Cairo, Egypt, in a huge underground gallery which contained the massive sarcophagi of some 30 sacred mummified bulls. The large sarcophagi are carved from granite or limestone, and each is accompanied with inscriptions describing the periods in which the sacred bull had lived. The sacred bull's connection to the cow dung inhabiting scarab, and therefore psilocybe, was exemplified by a mark of the scarab encrypted onto the bull's tongue. When archaeologists originally attempted to decipher the importance of these different symbols in ancient Egypt, the themes were simply overlooked by researchers, many of which had little or no information regarding psilocybe. It was previously thought by Egyptologists that the entire ancient Egyptian civilization, including royalty, must have held a, quote, misunderstanding of the behavior and nest-building activities of some dung beetles, unquote, and that misunderstanding was maintained throughout the entire history of ancient Egypt for over 3 millennia. Until recent times, it has thus been accepted that the pharaohs, which are attributed to massive monumental works such as pyramid structures, and whom are said to have been in charge of vastly stretching empires that reigned longer than any known civilization to date, quote, misunderstood the actual birth cycle of the beetle, and that they apparently thought of the beetle as being a single sex, male, which planted his seed in the round dung ball out of which came his offspring, unquote. The notions ascribed to the sacred scarab were thus that the dynasties reigning in Egypt were never aware of the activities of the female beetles. Previously, scholars have accepted these simple notions that ancient Egyptians, quote, very early associated the mistaken view of the dung beetle with the divine power they called Capri, who was a form of the sun god Ra, the morning sun reborn by self-regeneration, unquote. Thus it can be stated that the new evidence recently provided by Wasson and others on sacred psilocybin mushroom use, and conglomeration with a plethora of other research, has given overwhelming support to this alternative theory, one which propounds that Egyptian artists were not, quote, misunderstanding, unquote, but instead were misunderstood, and that the motifs of the scarab pushing a sun disk is in fact not a depiction of an actual sun at all, but rather inferably the golden cap of a psilocybin mushroom.
One reason why Jesus is depicted as being born in the manger is that's where the cows are. Here again, the falcon or bird-like symbols. This is another symbol of the scarab beetle with its wings and the disc above it, which is where we get the wings with the disc above it. And these are just a couple of examples. And it just goes back to this symbol here. Here's the serpents guarding it, the golden caps of the psilocybin mushroom. And then here's just another example. This is what's called a liberty cap, and in Europe they have sacred psilocybin mushrooms that are actually called liberty caps. And then you have a serpent right above it to depict that. That's the Department of Army. Here in Hinduism, you have the holy cow producing a holy cap. That's where we get that quote from. And then you have the serpent around his neck. You have him depicted in blue because it's common for psilocybin mushrooms to bruise blue when they're touched. And then you have his wife here dressed in her Amanita attire. These are just a few examples. Here you can see it more encrypted into the symbolism. It's hidden into the artwork because it's esoteric. Here is Shiva blatantly holding the mushroom. In Buddhism, we can see images of Buddha and the mushrooms. Here you can see the cobra around his head as well. And his last meals were mushrooms as well, it's said. Here in Greek, the ambrosia and nectar of the secret societies is said to be sacred mushrooms as well. This was from the Catholic Church right down here. And here's the Pope dressed like the Amanita itself. And so, thank you very much.
I'm puzzled. Are you really seriously suggesting that Jesus Christ was a mushroom?
Put pretty blankly, yes.
Surely you don't suggest that Jesus Christ and his various disciples were not human creatures.
Yes. You are dealing with a secret cult, a secret society. The stories of the New Testament contain certain incantations, certain magic names, which were really the names of the mushroom.
No, but the writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, these men who wrote the story, you are telling me they did not exist?
No.
None of them existed?
No, it's part of mythology. It's part of mushroom mythology.